So today we're going to talk about indices. I'm sure you've seen a variety of freedom indices, democracy indices that have been used all over social media to hammer India and the horrible, evil government that Indians had the audacity to elect.
A global watchdog monitoring freedom of expression has named India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi as one of 37 predators of press freedom.
और ये हम सब के लिए एक लेसन है कि हमें अपनी आंखें बंद नहीं करनी चाहिए इसको लेकर। हमें इससे सबक सीखना चाहिए कि डेमोक्रेसीज को बचाकर रखना हमारी जनरेशन की ड्यूटी है।
Well, in this video, let's try to find out how reliable these indices really are. And spoiler alert, not very. Let me tell you more about it. Hello, welcome to this new English series on the Sharma Show global channel. As you know, I am the CEO of secularism, Sharma, and to all of you, a very, very secular pranam. So people often use these democracy indices, press freedom indices, and they say, look, do you see India's poor position in all of these indices? If only you had listened to us. If only you had not elected Modi, none of these things would have happened.
You never listen!
Well, I'm still not going to listen to you. But what I am going to do is take a deeper look at these indices that are often used to beat India over the head. Is India's democracy really failing miserably as these indices and the people that consider these indices the word of God would have you believe? Or are these indices completely untrustworthy? Well, a lot like relationships on Facebook in 2012, it's complicated, and the truth tends to lie somewhere in the middle. So there are many indices, but we don't want this video to turn into the new Batman movie. So for the sake of brevity, let's look at two indices that have been quite extensively quoted by media and so-called secular intellectuals to showcase the decline of Indian democracy. The first one is the Press Freedom Index that is released by Reporters Without Borders. In this year's index, they have given India the 150th rank, down from 142 in the previous year, which is an 8-point fall for India, which is interesting, especially because countries like Turkey, Somalia, Hong Kong, and UAE are ahead of India. Which means Turkey, a country which is basically ruled by a dictator who has strongly increased the government control over all media in his country, is ahead of India. Somalia, where the ruling government is accused of carrying out political killings of journalists, is ahead of India. Hong Kong, where journalists are routinely jailed, where there was a massive crackdown on almost all COVID reporting, and news organizations are routinely shut down by the government, is ahead of India. And you'll see that in all the above countries, the regime that is in charge of these countries is the one that is hell-bent on curbing all media. The same assumption is made by Reporters Without Borders about India as well. This index believes that basically all of the attacks on journalists in India are made by the BJP and Hindu nationalists. And this thinking can very easily be seen by the explanation of India's ranking. The explanation basically puts all of the blame for media's poor state on the shoulders of the BJP and the Hindu nationalists. So already you're starting to get a very good idea of the political leanings of Reporters Without Borders. Further explanations of India's ranking are even more revealing. Reporters Without Borders basically straight up comes out and blames Pax and Godi media for the poor state of India's press freedom. So think about what Reporters Without Borders are saying. They're basically immediately stigmatizing a large percentage of the Indian population that voted for the BJP and media that might not be very left-leaning. Clearly, there doesn't seem to be any bias here. And if you don't believe me, let's take a closer look at their methodology and how they collect information about the freedom of the Indian press. On their methodology page, Reporters Without Borders says that press freedom is defined as the ability of journalists as individuals and collectives to select, produce, and disseminate news in the public interest independent of political, economic, legal, and social interference, and in the absence of threats to their physical and mental safety. So explain this to me. Would getting trolled online, would getting memed online, would getting pushback online when media publishes complete nonsense on the internet, will that be considered an attack on the mental safety of journalists? Will that affect India's ranking in the Press Freedom Index? If Indians decide to look into Rana Ayyub's shady financial dealings, or for that matter NDTV's alleged shady financial dealings, would that amount to legal and political harassment? Would that affect India's ranking? So the score of a country is basically based on a quantitative tally of abuses against journalists and a qualitative analysis of the situation in each country or territory based on the responses of press freedom specialists. So the Press Freedom Index relies on the opinions of specialists. Now, who do you think these specialists are going to be? Who do you think Western media goes to when they need information about India? I'll give you a hint. It's not Arnab Goswami. It's not Aman Chopra. It's not Rubika Liaquat. It's the same journalists that New York Times, Washington Post, and the BBC go to whenever they need to publish a story about India. And unsurprisingly, all the stories tend to be about rising authoritarianism in India. Basically, Reporters Without Borders and the Press Freedom Index is using these experts to confirm their biases about India. It's a bit like going to ISIS to talk about non-Muslims and coming back with the conclusion that non-Muslims really suck. This is a very good example of what in academia is called the citation loop, where scholars or journalists in this case only share information with or only quote other journalists that share their conclusions. This way, any opinion that does not agree with them is completely ignored, and thus a citation loop is created where only one opinion gets shared in the mainstream and all other dissenting opinions are successfully suppressed. Think of it like trying to find out about the state of the Indian movie industry but only watching movies that KRK was in.
मैंने तेरा क्या बिगाड़ा था?
And you'll obviously come back thinking, wow, the Indian film industry really sucks. But that's not true. What we are seeing here is the citation loop at work. So the questionnaire that Reporters Without Borders ask to develop their Press Freedom Index is based around 5 contextual indicators: political context, legal framework, economic context, socio-cultural context, and safety. And within the political context, they are attempting to evaluate the degree of support and respect for media autonomy, the level of acceptance of a variety of journalistic approaches satisfying professional standards, including politically aligned approaches and independent approaches, and the degree of support for the media in their role of holding politicians and government to account in the public interest. And that last one is really interesting because it's basically saying that if you have any problems with NDTV's reporting, Rana Ayyub's reporting, or The Wire's reporting, that is considered an attack on journalism. This index literally considers internet trolling to be an attack on journalism. Really? So you're telling me that this meme is an attack on journalists? So according to Reporters Without Borders, online trolling is a horrendous form of an attack on journalism, while at the same time, the same Reporters Without Borders stigmatize an entire section of the population of India by calling them bhakts and Godi media. In the socio-cultural context, they are aiming to evaluate social constraints resulting from denigration and attacks on the press, cultural constraints including pressures on journalists to not question certain bastions of power or influence, or not cover certain issues because it would run counter to the prevailing culture in the country or territory. So already, Reporters Without Borders have decided that BJP and the so-called Bhakts and Godi media are the prevailing narrative in the country, and so anybody who opposes this is a real journalist. And so attacking them is an attack on real journalism. And that's why they ask their experts questions like, is the pluralism of opinions of people in the country reflected in the media? What do you think they're going to say? It's like if you take a survey of 10 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists and ask them, does India suck? What do you think their answer is going to be? Look at this one. Can the media address culturally sensitive subjects without provoking a strong popular opposition movement? So basically, if you disagree with real journalists in any way, you are attacking media freedom. So basically, if I went and watched Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, and if I didn't like it, and if I tweeted that I didn't like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, does that mean that I'm attacking Karan Johar's freedom or Shah Rukh Khan's freedom? What the hell is this? Remember, the Reporters Without Borders already calls a section of Indians Bhakts and Godi media, but no one is allowed to question the reporters that Reporters Without Borders supports. It almost sounds like a familiar religious ideology where you can do whatever you want and say whatever you want about the heathens, but the true believers shall always be protected. So it's pretty obvious that the index has a very clear ideological leaning. The study basically places all the blame for the media's problems in India on the BJP, Bhakts, and the Godi media. But what about the journalists that get killed by Naxals? Is that the fault of the BJP? What about the journalists that are persecuted by the Aam Aadmi Party, by DMK, by TMC, by Congress, by the Shiv Sena? Is that also BJP's fault? Is that also Hindutva's fault? But Reporters Without Borders do not want to acknowledge this. Honestly, at this point, I won't even be surprised if they blame Danish Siddiqui's death in Afghanistan on the BJP government. Because why did the BJP allow Danish Siddiqui to go to Afghanistan in the first place? So I think it's a bit of wishful thinking to assume that you're going to get a fair assessment of India from Reporters Without Borders and the Press Freedom Index. Another index that has been widely quoted on social media in India has been the Democracy Index by Freedom House. This year, India's score is 66 out of 100 according to the Democracy Index, which makes India a partly free country. So the overview of their methodology will again show you how they collect their data and will again show you how they're biased against India. Because the reason for India's low score is mainly the persecution of the Muslim community in the country. And look at their data collection methodology. Again, they use these so-called experts who collect the data from various sources, including news articles, academic analyses, reports from non-governmental organizations, individual professional contacts, and on-the-ground research. Now again, who are these experts? Is Arnab Goswami going to be considered an expert here? Are researchers and intellectuals and academics that voted for the BJP, will they be considered experts in this case? Because remember, the sources that an Arnab Goswami will use are going to be very different from the sources that a far-left journalist like Ravish Kumar is going to use. So you again end up in a situation where these so-called experts present you with a one-sided story or a biased view of India. It's like going to a bunch of hardcore Barcelona fans and asking them their opinions about Real Madrid, and coming back with the conclusion that Zinedine Zidane is a bald fraud and he's probably got links to ISIS. Do you think that's a fair way to get information about Real Madrid and Zinedine Zidane? Again, once you start to dig a little bit deeper, you start to notice the biases that these experts have. Forget India. We know they're biased against India already. Let's look at even developed Western countries who had the audacity to elect right-of-center governments. Take, for example, the United Kingdom, a developed Western country with supposed liberal Enlightenment values. Britain got downgraded by Freedom House simply for deciding to leave the EU. Just because Britain decided that it doesn't want Brussels to tell them what to do, and they took a democratic decision to leave the European Union, that suddenly makes them undemocratic, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim. Why does limiting unfettered immigration immediately make you undemocratic? Is the only way to be democratic, according to Freedom House, is for every citizen in a country to legally adopt an immigrant and to name them in your last will and testament? According to Freedom House, doing background checks on people is also considered undemocratic, which is funny because the same people who want gun control and better background checks in the United States also want to remove background checks for immigrants. What the f?
What do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want? God damn it. What do you want?
Look at Denmark, another country which recently had elected a slightly right-of-center government. Denmark got downvoted for anti-immigration sentiment simply because it asks wealthy immigrants to not apply for certain government welfare. This welfare, by the way, doesn't even include education and healthcare. Education and healthcare is provided to all citizens and all immigrants. The only thing that they ask wealthy immigrants to take care of are housing and food. And in fact, they've asked this not just of the immigrants, but every Danish citizen as well. So basically, according to Freedom House, electing a right-of-center government and having even a slightly conservative stance on immigration makes your country a less democratic country. So for these people, democracy basically is like this weird state of mind. Just like for Rahul Gandhi, poverty is a state of mind. Again, what do you think the political leanings of these Freedom House experts are? Do you think they're more likely to vote Democrat or Republican? Do you think they're more likely to vote Congress or BJP? Do you think they're more likely to vote Tory or Labour Party? Look, in conclusion, I'm not trying to say that there aren't any problems in India. There 100% are. I spend half my time on my main channel bemoaning the lack of free speech in India. India desperately needs to get rid of its hate speech laws and its blasphemy laws. India desperately needs to improve its law and order situation if India is to ever become a high-income, mature, developed democracy. But the problem with these indices are that they conclude quite comprehensively that all of the problems that the press face in India are solely because of the BJP and its supporters, the Bhakts and the Godi media. And that is simply not true. It's basically the same thing as blaming a pedestrian's death on Hindutva rather than the bloody car you ran the guy over with. Ultimately, because of their biased approaches, these indices might be very good for sharing on social media, getting some likes and retweets, but in real terms, they have very little impact on India. Indians will ultimately do what they want, vote for whomever they want, and will not be dictated by people who think memes equals fascism. And that's today's video. I hope you found this video interesting, entertaining. If you liked this video, and if you think this video is educational, please share it as widely as possible with your friends, family, acquaintances, everybody. If you liked today's video, please make sure to leave a like, leave a thumbs up. It really helps the video out. It really helps get the video more reach and in front of more and more people. If you'd like to see me more such videos in English, please let me know in the comment section down below. Please suggest topics that you would like me to cover in this English series as well. And if you'd like to help the Sham Sharma show grow and produce more varied and interesting content, please become a patron on Patreon. The link is in the description down below. Other than that, I will see you for the next episode, and until then, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you next week, and until then, to all of you, a secular pranam.